This video is brought to you by True Tales of Buried Treasure, the largest collection of old treasure magazines in the West. On our website, you can search for individual treasure stories by region, or buy our original magazines themselves. To pay us a visit, please click on the link in the description. Enjoy. The rugged and unforgiving expanse of Death Valley has been a siren call for dreamers and fortune seekers for over 150 years. Its endless miles of barren, waterless wilderness have witnessed countless treasure hunters chasing legends that shimmer like mirages in the desert heat. The allure of hidden riches remains alive, passed down through stories that refuse to die. In the old days, these adventurers were the iconic burrowmen, hardy wanderers accompanied by their trusty pack animals. But times have changed. The burrowmen are gone, replaced by a new breed of explorer, the four-wheel drive enthusiasts. These modern-day treasure hunters swear their vehicles can rival the endurance of the burros of old, though whether that's true depends on who you ask. As weekend adventurers ourselves, we've spent years roaming the desert backcountry. 2 fully equipped campers have bitten the dust, and we're now on our 3rd. Have we uncovered any of those legendary lost gold deposits? Not yet, but we're convinced we've come tantalizingly close, so we keep searching. After all, the thrill is in the hunt. One early spring several years ago, we visited Alfred Giraud, a retired sheep herder nearing 80 who lived in Bishop, California. Word had reached us of a gold-rich deposit, discovered and lost in the desolate Saline Valley during the early 1900s. Giraud, as it turned out, knew more than a little about this tale. Saline Valley itself is a forbidding place, a 23-mile-long trough almost completely cut off from the rest of the world. The massive Inyo Mountains loom to the west, the Last Chance Range rises to the northeast, and the towering Panamints separate it from Death Valley to the east and south. It is not a region one ventures into lightly, but we were determined, hoping that Giraud could provide us with some clues before we embarked on our journey. Giraud shared a story that, though rarely publicized, never fails to spark the imaginations of treasure hunters. He told us about Alex Ramy, a compatriot of his from the French Alps, who spent years roaming the Death Valley region in search of gold. Ramy's life was one of extraordinary highs and devastating lows, a saga that seemed tailor-made for the harsh and unpredictable landscape of Death Valley. In the 1880s, Ramy was hunting for another golden strike in the Panamint Range, the heart of desert bonanza country. He was no amateur. He had already discovered and squandered 2 fortunes in his lifetime. Before arriving in Death Valley, Ramy had found success in Virginia City, Nevada, where he struck it rich while working a promising claim. His efforts yielded a small fortune of $30,000, a massive sum for the time. But Ramy's sudden wealth proved to be his undoing. A man of convivial spirit, he reveled in good company, bawdy songs, and flowing liquor. His generosity and love of a good time made him a popular figure, until the money ran out. One morning, Ramy woke up with nothing but a pounding headache and an empty purse. His fair-weather friends had disappeared as quickly as his fortune. Unbowed, the doughty Frenchman rolled up his sleeves and started over. This time, it took much longer for fortune to smile on him again. The rich veins of silver and gold he sought were elusive, favoring other miners. But Ramy persisted, enduring back-breaking labor and near despair until finally, his luck returned. Against the odds, he uncovered another rich deposit. This time, though, he was wiser. He chose his companions carefully, limiting their number and avoiding the pitfalls of his earlier indulgences. It seemed the lessons of loss had taught him caution. Giraud's tale of Alex Ramy was more than a story. It was a reminder of the resilience and grit that define those who chase the desert's elusive promises. Whether it was luck, skill, or sheer determination that saw Ramy through, his legend endures, inspiring treasure hunters like us to keep searching, hoping, and dreaming of our own turn at the wheel of fortune. Once again, Alex Ramy found himself flush with cash and ready to revel in it. The honky-tonks and saloons of the day welcomed him back with open arms, and this time, with fewer hands dipping into his pockets, his newfound wealth lasted a little longer. Ramy drank, sang, and entertained with his characteristic gusto, stomping and roaring out wild songs to the delight of his companions and the girls who adored his eccentric charm. But the party couldn't last forever. Inevitably, Ramy woke one morning to find himself broke again. This was his second fortune lost, and this time, the realization hit hard. He took a long, sober look at his life and admitted the truth. He had been a fool. Twice wealth had come to him easily, but it didn't return a third time. Forced to work for luckier, or perhaps smarter men, Ramy felt his independence slipping away. Disillusioned with himself and with Virginia City, Ramy set out into the desert, seeking one last shot at fortune. He eventually wound up in Death Valley, where he spent years prospecting. Though he found only enough gold to keep himself in bacon and beans, he grew to appreciate the stark beauty of the wilderness. His burros became his closest companions, and the wandering Native Americans of the region, who thought him just as crazy as the other whites searching for gold, became his friends. They shared with him invaluable knowledge of hidden springs scattered throughout the barren lands, information Ramy carefully stored away. As the years passed, Ramy roamed farther into the wilderness, his burros carrying his supplies of food and water. A seasoned desert traveler, he should have been the last person to fall victim to disaster, yet disaster came for him nonetheless, and this time he invited it. Ramy decided to cross the Last Chance Range, which sprawls north and west of Death Valley's upper tip. Around the southern end of the range, he found promising rock formations that reignited his hopes for a bonanza. He knew water could be found far to the west in Saline Valley, so he pressed on, shovelful by shovelful, convinced he was on the brink of uncovering the vein that would secure his old age. But his supplies dwindled, and he finally had to face the truth. It was time to leave. On the morning of his departure, calamity struck. Ramy awoke to find his burros had broken free and stampeded. Without them, the old man knew he was in grave danger. His arthritic rheumatism crippled him, and now he had to carry what little food and water he could manage. He cursed the animals as he shuffled south and west, his only hope being to reach water before it was too late. The miles crawled by as his feet worsened with every step. Somewhere between Dry Mountain and Ubahiba Peak, he drained the last of his precious water. Desperation set in, but he clung to a shred of hope, remembering the Native Americans' tales of a canyon where water ran underground and pooled at the surface. If he could reach one of those water traps, he might rest, fill his canteens, and maybe even find his wayward burros. Toward dusk, Ramy finally arrived at the spot. With renewed energy, he fell to his knees and dug into the sand with trembling hands. 1 foot, 2 feet, 3 feet. His fingers struck hardpan, but no water. He stared at the dry ground in disbelief, his hope collapsing around him. He hadn't considered the drought. There hadn't been rain in years, and in this arid region, water was nowhere to be found. Defeated but not yet ready to give up, Ramy knew his only chance was to travel through the night, when the desert air was cooler. Summoning what little strength he had left, he pressed on, hoping against hope to find water before it was too late. Then Ramy remembered the hot pools somewhere to the northwest. Though the water was unpalatable, it was water, and the Indians used it for medicinal purposes. Changing his course, he stumbled off, grateful for the bright moonlight to guide him. His mind grew hazy as he plodded over the rough, boulder-strewn terrain. His legs and feet burned with pain, and his throat was so dry he couldn't swallow. His swollen tongue felt monstrous, filling his mouth. At one point, as he rounded a jutting ledge, he collapsed against a rock wall. The crumbling stone beneath his scrabbling hands broke away, and though his instincts as a prospector were dulled by exhaustion, he clung to the fragments. Then he lost consciousness. Somehow, during the night, he must have regained his senses and attempted to move before fainting again. His next clear memory was of opening his eyes to the sight of waving palms, arrowweed, and willows. His swollen feet, 3 times their normal size, were blissfully soaking in a hot pool. Ramy later learned he owed his life to his Indian friends. Hearing his cracked voice laughing, singing, and calling, they recognized him and came to his aid. The men carried him to the pools, where a squaw took charge of nursing him back to health. She fed him pounded mesquite beans and lizards, and he rested while his tattered clothes lay cleaned and folded beside him. As he convalesced, Ramy noticed a simple hogan constructed of piled stone slabs and mesquite limbs on the side of a low hill nearby. The desolate landscape seemed impossible for survival, yet Ramy knew these Indians thrived in conditions where white men would quickly perish. Once he was strong enough, Ramy went through his old clothes. He discovered that the Indians had not touched a thing, but as his fingers brushed against a rock in his pocket, curiosity stirred. He drew out the sample, ready to discard it, but something stopped him. Instinct urged him to examine it closely. He stared, almost shouted, but caution silenced him. Even the Indians now understood that gold could buy food, liquor, and trinkets. He discreetly tucked the gold-rich rock back into his pocket. Examining smaller fragments that had broken off, he realized they too were rich in gold. He leaned back, closing his eyes, straining to remember where, in his recent travels, he had picked them up. The Indians told him they had seen burro tracks heading west toward the Inyo Mountains, 9 miles across the sun-scorched Saline dry lake. It was a grueling trek, especially for Ramy, who lacked a water container. Somewhere along the way he had discarded his canteens, and the Indians could not spare their only pot. They parted ways, with Ramy heading west. Weakened by his ordeal, Ramy's progress was slow. His feet had barely improved, and he found himself in dire straits again. This time he was rescued by a young French sheepherder named Alfred Giraud. The two men were delighted to discover they were compatriots, even hailing from the same part of the Alps. Later, Ramy showed Giraud the gold-flecked rocks and suggested they return together one day to search for the lode. Ramy was confident he could find it again, but Giraud declined, saying, "Later perhaps, but now I must tend to my sheep." Perhaps the younger man doubted the delirious old prospector's story. Who could say where those rocks had come from? Giraud was not a gambler. The desert had taken more out of Ramy than he realized. When his health failed, and he knew he could never return to that terrible country, he called Giraud to his sickbed. Handing over the gold specimens, Ramy gave his friend the clearest directions he could recall from his weakened state. Yet, Giraud did nothing. He was a sheepherder, not a dreamer chasing rainbows. The lode, if it ever existed, remains a mystery lost to the desert sands. About half a century later, long retired from sheepherding, an aged Alfred Giraud finally took an interest in the gold-rich rock Ramy had once entrusted to him. Curious, he brought it to an assayer and was stunned to learn that it was incredibly rich in gold. Realizing the potential fortune he had ignored for decades, Giraud set out, far too late, to uncover Ramy's lost lode. Determined, Giraud pieced together scattered clues. He heard about an old Chilean miner living in the Kern River region who had spent time in Saline Valley. Intrigued, Giraud sought him out. The Chilean, though frail, shared his story of finding a gold-rich specimen in Saline Valley. When the two men compared rocks, Giraud was astounded. They were identical. According to the Chilean, he had discovered his float somewhere in the vicinity of Bohemia, along the slopes to the west and south. Though Giraud's heart yearned to search for the lode, he hesitated. The journey to Saline Valley was grueling and remote, and the years had taken their toll. When we met with Alfred Giraud, he still spoke of someday making the trek, but his body no longer matched his dreams. Generously, he shared his memories of Ramy and all the clues he had gathered. Inspired by Giraud's account, we decided to pick up the trail ourselves. We made 2 trips into Saline Valley, one in early spring and one in the depths of winter. The journey was not easy. Twisting, snow-covered hairpin roads wound down the steep mountains into the valley, which lay just 1,000 feet above sea level. In winter, the valley was warm, but in summer, it turned blisteringly hot. A few hidden springs dotted the surrounding mountain canyons, and Hunter Canyon, at the foot of the Inyos, offered a cool, flowing stream where a miner still lived. Crossing the bone-dry Saline Valley Playa was another challenge. The unmarked road across the vast expanse was almost impassable. At one point, a massive cloudburst had obliterated our previous path, leaving jumbled boulders strewn across the wash. It took over an hour to crawl the last 3 miles to the hot springs we sought. Did we find Ramy's lost gold ledge? Not yet, but we're optimistic. We camped near the string of hot pools, palm-fringed oases that seemed almost unreal in the barren landscape. Exploring further, we found the old Indian hogan still intact, with a pile of mesquite firewood stacked by the doorless entrance. Scattered around were woven basket fragments, potsherds, and chipped tools, arrowheads, rainbow agate, chert, jasper, and even a rubbing pestle with a bowl-shaped matat. Beyond the hogan, smoke-blackened rock shelters nestled in niches along a high limestone wall that flanked the ravine. We felt sure we were close. North and east, dry mountains, barren, gray-brown peaks cut into the clear blue sky. Beyond the ridges, our map marked Ubeheba Crater, with Death Valley sprawling further east. Somewhere in this rugged terrain, Alex Ramy had stumbled upon the gold-rich lode over 60 years ago. How close were we? We could only guess. Though we saw signs of mining scattered throughout the area, we remained convinced that Alex Ramy's lost bonanza has never been found. That rich ledge, teeming with gold, is still waiting for some fortunate treasure seeker to stumble across it, just as Ramy did back in 1904. Will it be us next time? Who knows? But we'll keep searching. The dream of striking gold is too tantalizing to abandon. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to read the original article or purchase the magazine from which it was taken, please check out our website, truetalesofburiedtreasure.com.